For as long as I've been reading manga, the giant looming presence of One Piece has always been around. I'd ignored it before, thinking that the series was just way too long to ever start, or that it just wouldn't be for me. Not to mention how difficult the box sets are to find and buy. And I don't know what's changed, but it seems like in the past few months, an entire shipping container of One Piece box sets was found because I was able to purchase the first one and the second one. And so earlier this year I bought box set 1 in my one and only attempt to get into One Piece. I decided if the series wasn't for me, I could easily sell the box set for the same I bought it and go on with my life, but oh boy, that was never gonna happen. Before I'd even finished the first volume of the box set, I knew that it wasn't going anywhere. And from that moment forward, my love for One Piece began. This video is gonna have a pretty quick overview of the arcs leading all the way up to the ALABASTA arc. I'll share my thoughts and opinions from the time and from now looking back, having read the entire box set. And I'll also be ranking them visually on a tier list so you can see my opinions and how the different arcs stack up against each other. And if you haven't read One Piece and want to do so very cheaply, you can do on the Shonen Jump app for about £3 a month, which is insanely cheap because you can read 100 chapters a day. So if you're really efficient, for £3 you can read the entirety of One Piece. And yeah, it's amazing. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get into the East Blue Saga with Romance Dawn. The start of One Piece is arguably the most important if you think that it has to hook you for the next 1,000 chapters. And for what the beginning is, I think it sets up what the story is going to be really well. From the first 3 chapters alone, we know that the story is ultimately going to be a light-hearted adventure of going after the greatest treasure that ever has existed, the One Piece. Or at least, that's what some people may think. While Romance Dawn does set this up, it also shows that the series isn't going to be just fun and games, with the iconic scene of Shanks losing his arm to protect Luffy. Also in this arc we get the introduction of Roronoa Zoro, and he perfectly balances Luffy's endless optimism. The pair ground each other whilst also being great friends and crewmates, which is important considering he is the first crewmate on Luffy's crew. Whilst reading this, I would probably have put the arc straight up into A tier, but after reading it and knowing what comes next with better villains, better stories, and just overall a better structured arc, I think I'm going to put this arc into B tier. It sets up the main character, the world he's in, the stakes he's up against, and the powers he's got really well, but knowing what comes next, I can't put it any higher. Alright, let's head into Orange Town with the big bad Buggy the Clown. And we also get our second crewmate here, Nami. In terms of villains, I think Buggy here is way better than Aksan Morgan in the previous arc we just looked at. He's just more menacing, he has a devil fruit power, which is the first other one we've seen in the series, so this arc gets big props for that. What slightly lets it down in my eyes is that this arc is the beginning of the Luffy being captured so he can't immediately clobber the villain trope. Now of course I understand why this has to be done, but I can still find the trope annoying, and it gets reused quite a lot in the East Blue Saga, so this is mostly because right off the bat Luffy is pretty strong, and if he wasn't being withheld or captured in these situations, the arcs would be a lot shorter. Looking back on this arc, it's cool that Buggy returns in Town. It isn't just a one-off villain. I really like that Eiichiro Oda, writes his characters with staying power, and they do return when you least expect them, so that's really cool. With all that being said though, Orange Town slips into the C tier for me. It's got a decent fight of Luffy versus Buggy, but apart from that it doesn't offer much else, especially because our second crewmate Nami doesn't really get much development, if any here, but thankfully that will change. Next up we've got the Syrup Village arc, and surprisingly I really like this arc. A lot of people might think it's boring or slightly too long, but I think it's the perfect length considering quite a lot actually happens here. We meet our 4th crewmate, Usopp, and at first I thought he was kind of useless, and even now, partway through box set 2, yeah, he's pretty weak. But getting to see those moments of power and when he does fight makes it all the more special, and I've really grown attached to his character. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The other things in this arc, we get the Going Merry, arguably the biggest improvement to the Straw Hat crew so far. The Going Merry is iconic, and it's hard to imagine the crew without it, so this is a pretty big moment in the Straw Hat's development. Finally, this arc introduces Captain Kuro as the villain, who I would say is the most intimidating villain we've had so far. It felt like Luffy was actually in some trouble when he fought Captain Kuro, along with the fact that we have Kaya and the Usopp pirates who are pretty defenseless the whole time, so there's definitely some stakes in this arc. Furthermore, the more we get into the manga, the more advanced Luffy's moveset becomes, and this is one of the most enjoyable things to read over the whole manga. I'm glad to say that it doesn't stop like 10 volumes in. Oda keeps making up new moves for Luffy to use. I'm like 27 volumes in. There's still new stuff basically every chapter, so it's really, really cool to read. So overall, this arc has a fun fight, 2 new introductions to the Straw Hat crew if you count the Going Merry, which I do. So I think this arc nicely slots into the B tier. Alright, now stuff's starting to get good. The Baratie arc is immediately getting placed up in the A tier. For me, this is because it not only has a beautiful fight between Don Krieg and Luffy, but it also expands the world so much. It's been said before, but the introduction of Mihawk is like the first moment, because it just introduces this absolute unit who completely clobbers Zoro with no trouble at all. We really get a sense of how much of a step up the Grand Line is, and a sense of the power scaling, because we get to see the power our characters could eventually reach. And as far as Straw Hat introductions go, Sanji has got to be the best one for me. My boy is an upstanding gentleman who feeds the hungry no matter who they are, and also has a sad as flip backstory. I found myself liking Sanji more and more as I got into the manga, which is surprising because he has the most annoying recurring gag in the entire thing, but when you let him cook, literally, Sanji gets stuff done. Luffy is also allowed ample time to cook in this arc, and my favourite moment is when he punches Don Krieg through this like spiky armoured shield. He punches all the way through that and still makes Don Krieg bleed. That is so cool. The Baratie arc leads directly into the next arc, which is Arlong Park. And this is because whilst all the fighting was going on, Nami kinda took the Going Merry and just dipped. For a lot of people, this arc is what glued them to One Piece and let them know that it was going to be an amazing series. Now personally for me, the Baratie arc was what did that for me, but I can definitely understand why. Having said that, I can't chuck this up in the S tier, for me purely because I think there's an arc later in this video which deserves that spot a bit more, but we'll get to that. For now though, this A tier arc gives us some of the saddest backstory we've had so far, and it's well needed too. I wasn't that attached to Nami as a character yet, purely because she didn't have much substance yet, but this arc definitely fixed that. Here we learn she was trapped under the rule of this big giant fish boy, and she had to earn 100 million berries in order to buy her town back. This is a stupid comparison, but there's this one scene where the government takes all of Nami's savings, and it reminded me of the scene from Breaking Bad where Mike has all of his money taken that he was saving up for his granddaughter. It's that equal level of sadness that really sold the scene for me and really made me more invested in Nami's character. But this was also a great world building moment because we learned that the government is actually really corrupt, and that with the right incentive, they can work for criminals like Arlong. This arc is of course praised for the famous Straw Hat scene between Luffy and Nami. And yes, it's a baller moment. Luffy has been endlessly optimistic and energetic up until this point. But when things get serious, and he steps up to the plate to fight Arlong for his friend, his crewmate, his navigator, that's every kind of awesome. The Gum Gum battle axe, which erupts from the top of Arlong Park, is one of the most iconic scenes for me, and I absolutely adore it. But sadly, the reason I can't chuck this puppy up in S tier is because it sadly has quite an extended scene of Luffy being handicapped and unable to fight. It goes on for quite a few chapters, which is a bit cringe, but thankfully we do get some awesome fights between Usopp, which is amazing, Sanji and Zoro, and they happily take out some fisherman butt. It's kind of redeemed, but then again I hate the trope, so A tier it is. And with Arlong Park over, we get the first bounty of the series. These are like visual representations of the power scaling in the world, and this is the first one for our Straw Hat crew, so it's quite a big deal. For now, Luffy is given a starting bounty of 30 million berries for taking down Arlong, Don Krieg, Kuro, and Buggy. Moving swiftly along to the Baroque Works arcs, I'm gonna sort of speed run through a lot of these arcs because unfortunately a lot of them aren't that great, and I really want to get to Alabasta, so I'll give you the TLDR of these arcs. Honestly, it's not that important. Alabasta is the best one. First we have Logue Town, which does get points for the reintroduction of Buggy, which is really cool, and the amazing scene of Luffy on the executioner's platform with the guillotine. That scene gave me chills the first time I read it, but in retrospective, that's basically all this arc is, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Next is Reverse Mountain, which unfortunately for me goes into C tier because I didn't really enjoy Laboon's story as much as I think a lot of other people did. It probably wasn't helped by the villains of Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. I found them kind of weak, so I didn't really enjoy this arc too much, even though it's essential. Next up is Whiskey Peak, which is going to slip right into that D tier. Now, why am I putting a One Piece arc in D tier? Well, unfortunately this arc also suffers from the boring syndrome. Yes, it's really cool to see Zoro absolutely slay some Baroque Works members, but this is like immediately countered with the dumbest decision of Luffy fighting Zoro, his own crewmate, based purely off the word of some people he just met. Like, I know Luffy is supposed to be dumb and like 0 IQ, but I still felt this was sort of an out of character moment that brought this arc down for me. What was cool though was that we were introduced to Princess Vivi, who was previously Miss Wednesday, and her character is amazing. We get the overall goal for this long arc, which is returning her to her country of Alabasta to stop a civil war, which is a very cool premise. But unfortunately, we aren't there yet. Next up is Little Garden, which slots right into that C tier. It's okay, with the setting being awesome, and the characters of Dory and Broggy being amazing, along with a cool Sanji moment. But unfortunately, this arc, like a lot of the others around this point, is plagued with a pretty bad villain. I'm a fan of the whole Baroque Works power scaling thing. They basically have a 1 to 10 numbers system along with a partner for each of the people on 1 to 10. So it's very cool as a visual representation of the power scaling, but then again, when I'm watching Luffy fight Mr. 3 in a candle wax fight that goes on for like quite a few chapters, there's sort of no question that he's going to win because we have to get to Mr. 2, Mr. 1, and of course the big bad, Mr. 0. So it's like sort of just delaying the inevitable as I keep reading the chapters. And finally, the penultimate arc of this series is Drum Island, which I'm happy to say slots just into the bottom of A tier. It almost slips into B tier due to a very weak villain in Wapol, but thankfully it's saved by the introduction of Chopper, our newest Straw Hat member who is the resident doctor of the crew, and his amazing backstory. I also loved seeing Chopper fight. His whole form changing thing was completely new to me because, as I mentioned at the start, I was going into this blind, this series, so seeing him fight, which I didn't even know he could fight, was very cool. Another reason it stays in the A tier is because of that epic cannonball moment with Luffy at the top of the tower holding that flag. To me, that's the second most iconic moment in this whole of box set 1. And if you've seen the thumbnail of this video, you know what I think is the most iconic moment. And so along this very long, very cool journey, our world has expanded so much. We've met so many characters, been to loads of different islands, and we're finally here at Alabasta, which is the end game for this box set. We've grown more attached to Princess Vivi, who I haven't really mentioned over these arcs, but to be honest, she was the saving grace of a lot of these arcs. Just seeing her get more comfortable with the Straw Hats and become better friends with them was very cool. And for me, Alabasta has nowhere else to fit but the S tier for so many different reasons. This arc is reasonably long, but I still think I'm going to talk about all the standout moments because there's just so many, but they're all so cool. First, Luffy has a brother. Portgas D. Ace is very cool, and he's a member of the Whitebeard Pirates, which is very mysterious. I don't really know much about them, but they sound cool, and he's got cool fire powers, and he's just epic. He's a cool guy. He seems incredibly strong, and I can't wait to see more of his character in the future. Secondly, the villain for these last like 10 volumes of all these arcs in the Baroque Works saga is Crocodile, and he is one of the 7 warlords of the sea. If you're confused, earlier on we met that Mihawk guy, you know, the one who completely clobbered Zoro. Yeah, he is in the same league as Mihawk, okay? So you sort of know the power scaling Luffy is trying to go up against it. It felt impossible for him to win here, and this was made very clear by the fact that he fights Crocodile no less than 3 times. Round 1 is actually my favorite, taking place in the desert with Luffy holding back Crocodile so the other Straw Hats can go and take Vivi to Alabasta. This is really cool because Luffy throws absolutely everything he has at him, but to no avail. For the first time, it really feels like Luffy is completely out of his depth. And when Crocodile sucks the moisture out of Luffy's body, stabs him in the chest, and leaves him to rot in the desert, along with delivering the coldest line in the entire series, I knew stuff was getting serious. You're a 2-bit greenhorn, Straw Hat Luffy, upstarts like you were a dime a dozen on the Grand Line. That's so cool. That's fire. That's absolute fire. Some more fire moments are Sanji coming in clutch again with the goods, this time to save the Straw Hats from being in jail. And of course the epic fight with Chopper and Usopp against 2 of the Baroque Works members. Now, it's not the biggest fight with the biggest stakes, but it is still really cool because we have basically two of our weaker Straw Hats going up against some pretty strong members, so I found it really cool. Also, Zoro and Nami fighting the top two Baroque Works members was really cool, especially because Nami isn't exactly a trained fighter, but it was really cool to see that she'd actually asked Usopp to build her a weapon so that she could be more helpful in combat. Yeah, the weather stick she got was a bit janky and a lot lucky, but it was still cool to see her fight. Eventually we get Luffy versus Crocodile round 2, and it looks like our boy has a sound strategy this time with Water Luffy. We do get to see him absolutely clobber Crocodile properly this time, getting like the first reaction shot from a proper punch from Luffy, which is really cool, but unfortunately Luffy still gets defeated, and if it weren't for some very lucky shenanigans, Luffy would definitely have died this time. Round 3 is a very solid ending to the Crocodile Luffy fight saga. This time, not with the goofy Water Luffy design, which is very cool. This time he's hitting Crocodile with the blood on his hands, solidifying his punches, which is that's so cool. That's epic. That's really, really, really cool. And Gum Gum Storm being the finishing move is awesome. Seeing Luffy smash through multiple buildings, like vertically upwards. That amount of force and power is such an iconic moment, and it really did feel like a well-deserved victory. It's not like Luffy got lucky, he literally tried again and again, learning his opponent, knowing his weaknesses, until he won. And that basically concludes the arc, on a very surface level glance, that is. There's a lot of political stuff I didn't go into in this video for the sake of this video's length, but it really does flesh out the One Piece world, and made me understand why people cite One Piece as having the most broad and expanded world in a lot of different manga. But in conclusion, Alabasta best arc, Straw Hat's departure best moment. There's no real reason except that it's so cool, and their promise to Vivi to always be friends will bring a tear to a lesser man's eye. Thanks for watching this jumbo-sized A Brief Intermission video, and here's the finished tier list right here. Now go and watch or read One Piece and let me know your thoughts in the comments. But for now, thanks for watching this brief intermission in your life, and until next time, have a good one.